He handed me divorce papers, like I was just some employee he was letting go. No emotion, no explanation, just a signature line and a cold stare. He really thought he was in control. What he didn't know was I had already seen it coming. I had already counted every dollar he tried to hide. I had already hired someone smarter than both of us. So while he smiled and packed his gym bag, I was freezing every account he had. Credit lines, offshore transfers, company cards frozen, all of it. He left the house thinking he won the breakup, but when he tried to swipe his platinum card, and it declined, that was the real signature I left him with. They used to call me a trophy wife, and maybe I was, at least on the surface, perfect smile, impeccable hair. Always 2 steps behind my husband, Brian Carson, Savannah's rising star attorney. To the outside world, I had it all: the waterfront home, the Mercedes, the designer bags. But behind those French doors, I was invisible. Brian didn't want a partner, he wanted an accessory, a polished, obedient reflection of his success. He never hit me, he never even raised his voice, but his words, his silence, they chipped away at me until I was nothing more than a placeholder in my own life. He'd say things like, "You wouldn't understand the legal side, Natalie," or "Just let me handle it. It's too complex for you." And I let him, for years, I let him, because somewhere deep down, I still believed in us. Until one Tuesday morning. I remember the way he walked in, suit pressed, tie straight, holding a manila envelope like it was a grocery list. No kiss, no greeting. Just a cold, flat sentence, "I think it's time we both moved on." Inside that envelope, divorce papers, already filled out, already signed by him. He didn't ask me anything, didn't give me a chance to breathe. He placed the envelope on the marble kitchen counter like it was a done deal. And just like that, 12 years of my life were reduced to paperwork. He smiled, actually smiled. "I'll be fair," he said. "Let's not drag lawyers into this." My hands were shaking, but my voice calm. "Sure," I replied, my heart pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it. "Let's keep it clean." He nodded like he'd won, like I was too weak to fight. But what Brian didn't know is that I'd already been preparing. For 6 months, I had been watching, recording, gathering. Because even before he handed me those papers, I felt it in my bones. The late nights, the new passwords, the unexplained cash withdrawals. Brian wasn't just falling out of love, he was moving his life elsewhere. And I wasn't going to be left behind again. So I played dumb, I played soft. But every time he underestimated me, I added another piece to my puzzle. Bank account numbers, offshore wire patterns, company names I'd never heard of until I ran his mail through a scanner. He thought I was baking banana bread. I was printing tax returns. He thought I was redecorating the guest room. I was hiding a portable safe under the floorboards. And he thought I was crying myself to sleep. I wasn't. I was memorizing every line in our prenup, because if he was going to try to walk away with everything, then I was going to make sure he had to walk away with nothing. So when he handed me that envelope, I smiled back. Because he thought he'd just started the war. He didn't know I already had an army. The night after Brian handed me the divorce papers, I didn't cry. I poured a glass of Pinot Noir, sat on the back porch of our waterfront home in Savannah, and listened to the sound of the marsh frogs. They always came out after sunset when things were quiet, when things were hidden. That's how I operated now, in the dark, quiet, hidden. Brian thought I was soft, that I'd walk away quietly, let him keep his precious image, his bank accounts, and his clean separation. But what he didn't know was that I'd been playing the long game, and I was 3 moves ahead. 6 months before this papers, I hired someone, not a lawyer, not yet, but someone much more dangerous. Maya Lopez, former forensic accountant, former IRS consultant, the kind of woman who could smell a lie on a balance sheet from 50 feet away. I found her through a friend at a yoga retreat of all places. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Savannah. She wore a leather jacket and no smile. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. I nodded. I didn't need to convince her. Just show her the spreadsheet. Maya's eyes scanned my screen, line by line, transaction by transaction. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, a Shell LLC in Nevada, 2 business cards for companies I'd never heard of, but all tied to Brian's name. "Damn," she muttered. "He's good, but not good enough." That's when we started building the case, quietly, carefully. While Brian went to work trips in Miami, I went to the clerk's office downtown and pulled every public document I could get my hands on. Property records, corporate filings, even traffic tickets. Maya guided me through every step like a chess coach. "You're not just his wife," she said, "you're his legal equal," and he forgot that. Every night, after Brian fell asleep, I'd slip out of bed and scan documents into a locked folder. I named it Lemon Cake Recipes. He never questioned it. Every time he belittled me, I listened with a smile and filed it away. You'd never understand the tax structure, he once said while sipping bourbon. You're sweet, Natalie, but the law's just not your world. Oh, but it was now. We discovered that Brian had been moving assets out of our joint accounts slowly, very slowly, into one registered in his brother's name, a man who hadn't spoken to us in years. Classic move. Maya taught me how to track beneficiary changes, how to recognize patterns, how to prepare affidavits. I'm not going to court for you, she said bluntly, but when you go, you're going to walk in with a loaded gun. She wasn't wrong. I gathered everything. Every vacation expense that didn't match the calendar. Every sudden cash withdrawal. Every invoice from a company that didn't exist. And while I gathered, I smiled. Brian thought he had time. He thought he was in control. But behind every yoga class I attended, there was a strategy. Behind every dinner party I hosted, there was a file saved on my backup drive. I even started rehearsing my courtroom answers in the mirror. Practicing my pauses. Learning to cry without breaking. Learning to speak like the woman he never expected me to become. 'Cause I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his reckoning. One night, Brian came home late 2 a.m. He reeked of cologne that wasn't mine. His tie was crooked. His voice slurred. You're still up, he asked, surprised. I nodded, closing my laptop slowly. Just paying some bills, I said softly. He kissed my cheek, told me he appreciated how calm I'd been through all this. And I smiled, because I knew something he didn't. I had just filed a quiet request with the county court, a motion for emergency financial protection due to suspected asset concealment. Brian had no idea. The next day, I met Maya behind a courthouse. We sat in her old sedan, engine running, heat low. She handed me a USB stick. This, she said, is everything: bank logs, emails, travel receipts, even a phone record from when he called the Bahamas. I stared at it. My fingers trembled. This is going to ruin him, I whispered. Maya shrugged. He ruined himself. You're just holding the mirror. That night, I opened a new email account under a different name. I sent the files to my lawyer, a woman I had quietly hired 1 month prior. Her name was Vanessa Green, and she was known for 2 things: courtroom precision and not blinking under pressure. We had never spoken in public. All meetings were on Signal. All paperwork was hand-delivered. Vanessa had one question: are you willing to go all the way? I said yes, because Brian gave me divorce papers. But I was going to give him a financial implosion, the kind he'd never recover from. While he was booking flights to Cancun, I was booking courtrooms. While he was transferring money to secret accounts, I was setting legal landmines in every direction. And while he was telling his friends he'd be single by spring, I was preparing to freeze everything he'd ever touched. This wasn't revenge. This was reality rebalanced. The days blurred together after that. Brian started staying out later. He stopped pretending to care, but I kept pretending. I cooked. I smiled. I asked how his day was, all while logging into encrypted drives at night. I'd become fluent in silence. My power wasn't in confrontation, it was in preparation. I opened a P.O. box in my name, rented a small office space under a shell business for mail and legal correspondence. Brian never questioned it. He thought I was trying out a new home decor venture. Perfect. At that office, I met with Vanessa once a week. She brought case law, I brought evidence. We built a timeline, a paper trail, a pattern. Everything he thought was hidden, I unearthed it. He had created a secondary trust fund, one with a forged timestamp dated before our marriage. But Maya traced the IP address of the original edits made from our home network 3 years ago. Amateur mistake. We drafted a list of 38 financial discrepancies. Vanessa highlighted the worst in red ink. It looked like blood across a war map. You'll need to stay calm when this breaks, she said. I nodded. I've been calm for a year. Brian's arrogance became my biggest advantage. The more he thought he was winning, the sloppier he got. One night, I found a receipt for a diamond bracelet. Not my size, not my style. When I asked, he smirked. It's for a client's wife. A thank you gift. I nodded, said nothing. But I sent that receipt to Vanessa. She added it to the pile. Then came the dummy corporation, Riverbrook Holdings. No employees, no website. Just a checking account with $112,000 moved from our joint real estate fund. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I was watching everything now. I started learning the legal lingo, cross-referencing court precedents, reading financial codes. I became obsessed. This wasn't about saving the marriage. This was about reclaiming myself. Every lie he told, I turned into leverage. Every secret he hid, I turned into fuel. The night before our scheduled mediation, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. Not because I was broken, but because I had evolved. I was sharper now, colder, not out of spite but out of clarity. Brian wanted a clean exit, but he didn't deserve it. So I put on my pearls, my softest smile, and walked into the lion's den, ready to pull the rug out from under the king himself. The morning of the mediation, I stood in front of the mirror for a full 5 minutes. Not to fix my makeup, not to adjust my blouse, but to look at myself. Really look. I wasn't the same woman he married. I wasn't the quiet wife who used to wait for him to come home. I was the storm he never saw coming. Brian arrived late, of course, smiling, phone in hand, acting like it was just another meeting he would breeze through. We sat in a sterile room, beige walls, fluorescent lights, a mediator between us, trying to act neutral. She had no idea. Brian leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, and started tossing out numbers. I think Natalie deserves half of the primary residence and a fair monthly stipend, he said with fake generosity. We don't have to go into messy details. Vanessa didn't even flinch. She slid a folder across the table. Before we proceed, I believe you should review these. Brian opened it, and for the first time in my life, I saw his confidence falter. Inside were over 50 pages. Bank transfers, LLC registrations, real estate records, travel logs, text messages, and a sworn statement from Maya Lopez detailing her findings. His face turned from smug to pale in seconds. What is this, he asked. Evidence, Vanessa replied calmly. We've filed an injunction. As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, your assets are frozen pending investigation of fraudulent concealment. The room fell silent. Brian looked at me like I had stabbed him in the back. But I had only held up a mirror. He tried to recover, tried to act like it was a misunderstanding. This is ridiculous, he said, trying to laugh. You think you can scare me with paperwork? Vanessa slid another document forward. This is a court-approved restraining order against asset liquidation, signed by Judge Kirkland. You're already in violation for the attempted transfer to Riverbrook Holdings. Brian's jaw clenched. You don't know what you're doing? I finally spoke. I know more than you think. I know about Belize. I know about the trust fund you backdated. And I know about Riverbrook, which, by the way, is a terrible name for a fake company. His mouth opened, closed, nothing came out. The mediator looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I didn't stop. I also know you bought a bracelet for someone named Candace. Size 6 wrist, not mine. Brian turned red. You've been spying on me. I smiled. No, I've been protecting myself. He stood up, shouted, called me names I won't repeat. But Vanessa remained still, letting him implode. You just killed your own credibility, she said when he was done. Congratulations. The mediation ended in chaos. Brian stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Vanessa turned to me and asked, You ready for round 2? I nodded. My hands were steady. The next week was a whirlwind. Brian's lawyers tried to delay the hearing, claimed the evidence was circumstantial, said I was emotionally unstable. But the paperwork spoke louder than any tantrum he could throw. We had emails with timestamps. We had document edits tied to his home IP address. We had transaction patterns that screamed evasion. In court, Brian tried to charm the judge. He wore his best suit, told sob stories about how the divorce had blindsided him. But when Vanessa took the floor, it was surgical. She laid out the timeline, showed the judge every red flag, every lie. And when Maya was called to testify, she did it with cool precision. I've reviewed over 400 divorce cases, she said. This one is textbook concealment. Brian looked like a man unraveling. Every corner he had backed me into, I turned into a door. Then came the final blow. Vanessa submitted a motion requesting that I be granted temporary control over all marital assets pending full investigation. Brian laughed out loud, but the judge didn't. Motion granted, and just like that, his access was gone. His accounts, his credit, his investment portfolios, frozen. I walked out of that courtroom and took the deepest breath I had in years. Outside, reporters were starting to circle, rumors were spreading. A powerful attorney under investigation for financial fraud. Karma had a name that day, and it was mine. But this wasn't just revenge, it was a reset. I drove home to the house he tried to keep. The same one where he handed me divorce papers like they were trash. I walked through the halls not as a guest, but as the woman reclaiming her name. And in the quiet of the kitchen, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and checked the accounts. All frozen, every last one. Brian had left me with paperwork. I left him with consequences. That evening, I received a call from Maya. I saw the court order. She said, he must be panicking. He is, I replied, but he still thinks he can fix it. Let him try. Every move he makes now will dig his hole deeper. She was right. By the end of the week, Brian attempted to open a new credit line through one of his dummy corporations. The bank flagged it instantly. The judge added a violation to the ongoing proceedings. Then came the real shift. Vanessa discovered a wire transfer Brian had made 3 months prior to an unknown consulting firm. After some digging, we found out it was a shell front for a luxury real estate agent in Miami. A woman named Candace with a size 6 wrist. It didn't matter that he cheated. What mattered was that he had used our marital funds to pay for her condo. So we filed again. Another injunction, another win. Brian was unraveling publicly now. His law firm placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the financial investigation. His face, once seen on billboards, was now plastered across local news with the headline "Savannah attorney under fire in high-profile divorce case." Every time I stepped out of the house, I was no longer just his ex-wife. I was the woman who didn't flinch. My friends, some of whom once pitied me, now looked at me with a new kind of respect, and maybe a little fear. I didn't gloat, I didn't brag, I just kept moving. The final hearing was set for the following month. I remember walking into the courtroom wearing the same necklace Brian had once said made me look too ambitious. This time, I wore it like armor. The judge addressed us both. "Is there any final statement before we issue the ruling?" Brian's lawyer declined. Vanessa stood. "Your Honor, my client would like to speak for herself." And I did. I stood up, heart calm, voice steady. For years, I let someone else write the story of my life. I let him decide who I was and what I was worth. But not anymore. This isn't just about money, this is about truth. And every document we've submitted is my truth signed, sealed, undeniable. The judge nodded. Then she read the ruling. I was awarded 70% of the assets, control of the marital estate, and legal permission to pursue damages if further concealment was discovered. Brian didn't look at me. He didn't have the strength, and I didn't need it. I walked out of that courtroom not just free but fortified, because when he gave me divorce papers, he expected me to fall apart. But instead, I froze his empire, and I did it with poise, with facts, and with a silence that screamed louder than any fight. He'll rebuild, maybe, but he'll never forget the day the woman he underestimated stood up and took everything back after the ruling. The silence between us grew louder than ever. Brian didn't speak to me again, not a word, not in the parking lot, not in the hallway, not in the weeks that followed. He moved out of the house a few days later, left most of his things behind, designer suits still hanging in the closet, his prized whiskey collection untouched, the leather briefcase he carried for a decade, abandoned by the front door like a forgotten child. I didn't touch any of it. It wasn't mine to carry. Instead, I walked through the house like I was seeing it for the first time. Each room echoed with the absence of his dominance. And in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard in years, my own breath, my own voice. Freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the click of a lock you now control. I changed the codes, replaced the furniture, donated every single item that reminded me of the woman I used to be, his shadow. But my fight wasn't over. Brian was bleeding, and like any predator, he didn't know how to lose with grace. He filed an appeal, claimed the court had been biased, claimed I'd manipulated evidence, claimed Maya had falsified documents. But it was all noise. Vanessa filed a counter motion so sharp, it may as well have been a guillotine. And then it got public. A leaked email, a whistleblower. Suddenly, the local press wasn't just interested in a messy divorce. They were digging into Brian's past cases, his financial ethics, his tax filings. The Bar Association launched a review, and all I did was sip my coffee and wait. I didn't call reporters, I didn't post anything. But people talked, people whispered. It turns out, when you hurt someone long enough, the world doesn't weep for you when you fall. Brian began showing up in tabloids with headlines like "Savannah's Golden Lawyer Under Scrutiny" and "Divorce Exposes Deeper Secrets." He moved in with his mother in Charleston into the same guest room he mocked when we visited. Poetic, really. One day, I received a package. No note, just the bracelet, the one he bought for Candace. I dropped it into a donation box without a second glance. Because by then, I had something better than closure. I had clarity. The clarity of knowing I never needed revenge to win. I only needed truth and a spine made of quiet steel. I spent the following months rebuilding, not my life. My life had always been there, buried. Maybe, but never broken. No, I rebuilt my vision. I started volunteering at a local women's legal clinic. Women who'd been silenced, erased, just like I once was. I told my story not for pity, but as proof that silence isn't surrender, that preparation is power. And slowly, I became someone I recognized again. One morning, a woman sat across from me, shaking. He left me with nothing. She said, "I don't even know where to start." I smiled. "You start by watching, you start by documenting. And you remember you don't have to scream to be strong." That woman now works 2 doors down from me. She's going through law school. We're building something, a foundation, a program, a place where women can come not to cry but to plan. Brian's name doesn't come up much anymore. Last I heard, he was working at a small law office, doing contract reviews for realtors. He hasn't passed another bar review. His license is still under audit. Some might call it karma. I call it consequence. The house, it's mine now, not just legally, but emotionally. I threw a party the night the appeal was dismissed. Small, intimate. Laughter echoed through halls that once swallowed my voice. Someone asked, "Do you regret not taking more?" I raised my glass. I took everything that mattered, my dignity, my truth, my name, because at the end of the day, it was never about the money. It was about rewriting the story he tried to end with a signature. It was about proving that I was never disposable, never replaceable. He tried to discard me with a single envelope, but I wrote my answer across every frozen asset, every courtroom silence, every headline that bore his shame. He gave me divorce papers, and I gave him history. My history, one I'll never let anyone else write again. Weeks after the appeal was denied, I started waking up without dread. It's funny how you don't realize how tightly you've been clenching until the moment you exhale and feel your own lungs again. I repainted the living room, not because it needed it, but because I did. Every brushstroke was a reclamation of space, of peace, of the identity I had diluted for a man who thought I was decoration. One day I found an old photo tucked into a book me at our wedding, smiling up at Brian like he was the answer to every prayer. I stared at that girl. She looked happy, but she had no idea what was coming. So I whispered something to her, something I wish I'd known then. "He's not the answer, you are." I placed the photo back between the pages. Let it stay there, like a pressed flower, fragile, preserved, but no longer blooming. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights still felt hollow. Some memories still stung like fresh paper cuts. But they no longer owned me. I had started therapy, something Brian once called a waste of time for people who can't handle life. Turns out, it was the best investment I ever made. My therapist, Dr. Lee, once asked me, "What does justice mean to you now?" And I thought about it. "It's not about punishment," I said. "It's about being seen." Because for years I was invisible. My intelligence, my instincts, my pain, they all existed in his blind spot. But not anymore. Now, when I speak, people listen. Now, when I walk into a room, I take up space. And I do it without apology. My financial future, it's stable. More than that, it's mine. I started consulting with other women in high-asset divorces, taught them how to read their bank statements, how to spot discrepancies, how to stay silent, but aware. They called me ruthless. I called it necessary. One evening, I got a message request on social media. It was from Candace. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. She wrote, "I had no idea, I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses, no begging, just truth. And strangely, I appreciated that. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because she didn't owe me an apology, he did, but I had stopped waiting for it. Some debts go unpaid. Some wounds never get an apology letter. But life goes on. I hosted my first workshop 6 months after the final ruling. We filled every seat. Women from all walks of life, each carrying invisible bruises. They asked how I did it, how I stayed calm, how I didn't lose my mind. And I told them the truth. I did lose it. Then I found it. One document at a time, one page of truth after another. That workshop turned into a program. That program turned into a movement. We named it Reclaim, because that's what we were all doing, not just surviving, but reclaiming everything we were told we couldn't be. One night, I walked past the courthouse, the same one where I sat, spine straight, while my ex unraveled. I looked at the columns, the stone steps, the heavy doors, and I smiled. Not because I beat him, but because I didn't let him define the terms. He gave me divorce papers, but I gave myself power. And that made all the difference. It's strange how the end doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the soft thud of a final letter dropping into your mailbox. It was from the court, official, cold, permanent. Brian's appeal had been rejected again, this time, without room for another motion. The ink had barely dried when I realized it was truly over. Not just the legal fight, the war, and I had won, but victory didn't feel like I imagined it would. There was no music, no cinematic slow-motion walk into the sunset. There was just peace. I sat on my porch that evening, my porch, the one he used to say was too small for company, and I watched the sunset over the Savannah marsh, the same way I used to, before the world taught me to look over my shoulder. Now, I didn't have to. I had faced the storm, and I was still standing. Not just standing, thriving. I had finally finished turning the house into mine, every rug, every lamp, every piece of furniture chosen by me, for me. I even knocked down the wall he insisted we keep for structure. Turns out the whole place felt lighter without it. So did I. I hosted my first legal mentorship brunch that weekend. Just 10 women, fresh coffee, notepads, no filters. We talked about red flags, about paperwork, about silence. One of them cried when she told me she didn't know how to read her own divorce settlement. So we walked through it together line by line until she could. That's what justice looks like. I think not revenge, empowerment, reclamation. Later that afternoon, I received an email from a former associate of Brian's. He'd read about the case in a legal journal, said he never liked the way Brian spoke to me. Now I understand why. He wrote, "You were never weak, just waiting." I didn't reply. But I saved the email because some victories aren't about proving them wrong. They're about proving yourself right. One evening, I walked past a boutique downtown. In the window was a dress, silk, bold red, the kind of dress Brian used to call too loud. I bought it, wore it to dinner with Maya and Vanessa. Maya raised her glass and said, "To the quiet ones, the ones they never see coming." We laughed, but deep down, we all knew the truth. There's power in patience. There's a sharpness in strategy. And there's poetry in becoming the woman they tried to erase. I was no longer someone's wife, someone's reflection, someone's supporting act. I was the author of my story, my strength, my future. A few months later, I launched a podcast. Nothing fancy, just me, a mic, and stories. Stories of women who left, who stayed, who planned, who survived, and who eventually won. The first episode, How I Froze His Bank Account Before He Knew I Was Leaving. It went viral. Hundreds of messages poured in, some angry, some grateful, all raw. I read every single one. And every time someone wrote, "You made me feel seen," I whispered the same thing. I see you too. Sometimes I think about Brian. Not with hatred, not even regret. Just distance. He was a chapter. I was the book. Word reached me through a mutual friend that he tried to start over in Florida. Small law office, new girlfriend, fewer assets. Apparently, he's quieter now. Good. Let silence teach him what arrogance never could. One night, I got a message request. This time from his mother. It was short. "I'm sorry for not seeing what he was doing. I hope you're okay." I stared at it for a long time, then replied, "I am," because I was more than okay. I was whole, complete, unshakable. He gave me divorce papers like they were my end, but they were my beginning. And every time I tell my story, I reclaim another piece of the girl who once thought survival was silence. She was wrong. Survival is voice, and I will never be silent again. The podcast took off faster than I expected. Soon, I was receiving invitations to speak at law schools, at conferences, even at shelters. My inbox overflowed with women sharing their stories, their fears, their silent victories. I became something I never expected, a symbol, not of revenge, but of resilience. One night, after a speaking engagement in Atlanta, a young woman approached me in the lobby. "I listened to your episode," she said. "The one about the bank account? I did the same. He never saw it coming." She hugged me before I could respond, and as I watched her walk away, I realized something important. What I built wasn't just for me. It was for her, for all of them. Every tear I cried in secret became a stone in the foundation of something greater. Every time I swallowed my anger turned into steel I now carried in my spine. Even my pain had been repurposed. One morning, I stood in front of a mirror, the same mirror from all those years ago, and finally saw someone I admired. Not because she was flawless, but because she kept going. Because she learned the language of her oppressor and turned it into her anthem. Because she chose healing over hate, strategy over screams, grace over fire, though she carried all three. I started writing again, not legal briefs or witness statements, but essays, letters, poems. I wrote about the ache of being invisible, about the rush of taking control, about the terrifying beauty of starting over. One piece was published in a national magazine. The editor called it a manifesto of rebirth. I called it Survival in Prose. On the one-year anniversary of the ruling, I held a small event, not a celebration, a commemoration. We lit candles. We read letters. We stood in a circle and promised never to let another woman walk blind into a war she didn't choose. Vanessa was there, so was Maya. So were 30 women I once only knew as case numbers or client files. Now they were sisters, warriors, torchbearers. Brian's name wasn't spoken that night. Not once. Because it didn't need to be. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about us. About what we rebuild when the dust settles and the world stops watching. About how we stitch ourselves back together thread by thread until the scar becomes a seam of strength. I still keep the court letter in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That no one gets to write the final line of your story except you. I still walk past the courthouse sometimes. The weight of it no longer haunts me. Now it feels like a monument, not to what broke me, but to what I survived, to what I reclaimed. And every time I pass it, I whisper to myself, "He gave me divorce papers, but I gave myself everything else."